icy aisles of an upscale supermarket, a millionaire was carefully selecting expensive wines when he felt a desperate, insistent tug on his trousers. A 6-year-old girl, dressed in worn-out clothes but with determined eyes, held a carton of milk, trembling with urgency. She made a proposal that froze his blood. "If you buy me this milk, I'll tell you a secret about the pretty lady who always came here with you." Intrigued, he reluctantly agreed, thinking it was only a child's fantasy. But when the girl began to reveal intimate details, his world completely collapsed. Arthur Sterling pushed his cart down the wine aisle with surgical precision. The soft whir of rubber wheels on the polished floor was the only sound breaking the silence of his thoughts. Here, in this upscale grocery store, an oasis of abundance and tranquility, he found a rare moment of peace. Each bottle on the shelf represented a decision, a calculation of vintage and value, much like the way he managed his vast estate. His businesses thrived. His stocks on the market climbed with almost tedious consistency, and the cash flow from his companies was so robust he barely needed to think about money. Yet, all his fortune felt hollow, an ocean of bills and figures that couldn't fill the chasm left by Helena's absence. A year ago, his wife had passed, and since then, Arthur's world had lost its color. He selected a French label, a full-bodied red that cost enough to feed a family for a month, and gently placed it in his cart. It was for a meeting, a formality. Nothing truly tasted good anymore. That's when he felt it. A tug, small but insistent, on the hem of his Italian linen pants. He frowned, annoyed by the interruption. His first instinct was to ignore it, but the tug came again, a little stronger. Arthur looked down and saw a tiny figure beside him, a girl, perhaps 6 years old, with tangled dark hair and a faded dress that had seen better days. Her feet were bare inside worn plastic sandals, a stark contrast to the impeccable gleam of the floor. But it was her eyes that held him, large, brown, and filled with a determination that belied her age or fragile appearance. In her small hands, she clutched a carton of whole milk as if it were treasure. "Sir," she said, her voice a firm whisper, "I need help." Arthur sighed. He was accustomed to requests. His generosity was well known. Almost a weakness his partner, C. Ricardo, always warned him to control. He pulled out his wallet, an automatic gesture, ready to solve the problem with his usual efficiency. Money was the solution to almost everything. He pulled out a high-denomination bill. "Here, little one, buy the milk and anything else you need." But the girl didn't reach out. Instead, she shook her head, her eyes fixed on his. "I don't want your money," she said with disconcerting seriousness. "I want you to buy this milk for me, at the checkout, with your things." Arthur was perplexed. The insistence was strange. Why the formality? Was it a game? He was about to refuse, to say he didn't have time for games, when she spoke again, and her words hit Arthur like a bolt from the blue. "If you buy this milk for me," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a secret, "I'll tell you something. A secret about the pretty lady with light hair who always came here with you." The air left Arthur's lungs. The grocery store, with its aromas of fresh bread and imported fruits, seemed to vanish. The pretty lady, Helena. No one would describe her any other way. A chill ran down his spine. How could this child, a complete stranger, know about Helena, about their visits to this very aisle? He knelt, trying to find any sign of a lie or trick in the girl's eyes, but only found a grim urgency. "How do you know about her?" he asked, and his voice hoarse. The girl clutched the carton of milk to her chest. "I see everything. I remember everything," she replied. "The milk first, then the secret, a secret you'll want to know." Arthur's heart hammered. A part of him, the logical, business-minded part, screamed that it was a trap. Nonsense. But the other part, the part that still bled from grief, desperately needed any fragment of Helena, any piece that could fit into the puzzle of his loss. He looked at the milk in her hand, then at the child's serious face. This exchange wasn't about charity. It was about something much larger. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. "I'll buy the milk." He stood up, the expensive wine bottle forgotten in his cart, and waited for her to follow. But the girl remained still, and when he turned, she met his gaze with a terrible wisdom in her childish eyes. "The secret isn't about how beautiful she was when she smiled," the girl said, and each word weighed a ton. "It's about why, in the end, she stopped smiling." The girl's last words echoed in Arthur's mind, silencing the gentle hum of the grocery store. She stopped smiling. It was such a simple observation, yet so terribly precise. In her final months, Helena's smile had become a rare and fragile thing, a flower struggling to bloom in barren soil. He had attributed it to illness, to weariness, to resignation, but the way the girl said it suggested a cause, not a symptom. Without a word, he pushed his cart towards the checkout, the child following him like a small shadow. Each step felt heavy, as if he were walking towards a revelation he wasn't sure he wanted to face. He, a man who controlled an empire of businesses and investments, felt utterly powerless before a little girl and her secret. What could a child know that his doctors, his resources, his immense wealth couldn't uncover? At the checkout, the cashier smiled cordially, ringing up the expensive wine and the cheap carton of milk with the same professional indifference. To her, it was just another purchase. To Arthur, it felt like a transaction of the soul. He paid, the gesture mechanical, his hands feeling strange and distant. Bag in hand, he turned to the girl who waited patiently, her eyes fixed on him. He guided her to a wooden bench near the exit, a small refuge away from the flow of customers. He sat, and the girl remained standing before him, clutching the bag with the milk. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than intended. "Leah," she replied. "Leah, what did you see?" he pressed. Trying to keep his composure, Leah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she described a scene. "The pretty lady, your Helena," she began, and the use of her name made Arthur's heart stumble. She always ran her hand through her hair when she was nervous, and she touched the moon necklace she wore all the time. One day, she was in line for orange juice, which she always got. Your friend came up behind her and made a joke. She smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. After he left, she looked at the juice bottle in her hand, and her face grew sad, as if the juice were the problem. Arthur froze. The details were overwhelmingly intimate. The moon necklace, a gift from him, the habit of touching her hair, the preference for that specific juice. These were fragments of memory he held like sacred relics. How could Leah know? He had thought those conversations, those moments, were private. "And the why do you pay so much attention?" he managed to ask. "My little brother, Theo, is sick," Leah said, and for the first time her voice faltered, revealing the child behind the brave facade. "We live somewhere, and we don't have much. So I come here where people have everything. I watch, I learn. Sometimes people drop money. Sometimes they leave half a sandwich in the food court. I need to know who's safe and who's not. I see the patterns. I see who's kind, who's angry, who's lying. It's how I survive. It's how I take care of Theo." A wave of compassion and horror swept over Arthur. 2 children, alone, surviving by observing the silent secrets of the rich. It was a reality so distant from his world of profits and dividends, it felt like fiction. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect them, to envelop them in his financial security. "Where do you live? I can help. A doctor for your brother, food, a safe place." "You still don't understand," she interrupted, her seriousness returning. "The help we need isn't bought. You need to hear the rest of the secret, the important secret." She leaned closer, and her large eyes seemed to hold all the pain in the world. It wasn't just the juice that made her sad. It was him, your friend. My friend, Arthur repeated, confused. Which friend? Leah looked over Arthur's shoulder towards the gleaming parking lot, as if she could see the man there. The one who sometimes came with you, the one who's always smiling, she said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I saw him. One day, when you separated for a minute, I saw him put a little something in her juice, something from his pocket. It was quick, so quick that if you blinked, you'd miss it. The accusation hung in the sterile air of the grocery store, so absurd and poisonous that Arthur tasted bitter in his mouth. Ricardo, his best friend, his partner, the best man at his wedding, the man who wept beside him at Helena's funeral. The idea was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that his first reaction was a wave of protective fury, not against Ricardo, but against the girl. He glared at her, his gaze hardening. Who was she to taint the memory of his friendship, one of the few solid things he had left? Ricardo was the rock in his sea of grief. He managed the businesses when Arthur couldn't get out of bed, ensured investments kept yielding profits, and forced him to eat when food tasted like ash. Impossible. It was the fantasy of a desperate child mixing fact with fiction to get more than a carton of milk. This is absurd, Arthur said, his voice low and controlled, but vibrating with contained fury. You don't know what you're talking about. Ricardo was her best friend. He loved her like a sister. Leah didn't flinch at his tone. She simply watched him with those old, tired eyes. I don't know about love, she said with cutting simplicity. I just know what I saw. He smiled at you both, but when he turned away, the smile vanished. His eyes were cold, like stones at the bottom of a river. Arthur shook his head, standing up. The conversation had gone too far. He needed to take these children to a safe place. Hand them over to someone responsible and forget this insane accusation. It was grief talking, he thought. Grief made him vulnerable to any story, no matter how bizarre, that offered an explanation for the tragedy that had taken Helena. Her illness had been rare, aggressive, and inexplicable. Doctors were perplexed by how quickly she deteriorated. But poisoning by Ricardo? It was the plot of a bad movie, not his life. He remembered an afternoon, just weeks before Helena passed. She was too weak to get out of bed. Ricardo appeared with a stack of art books and spent hours by her side, reading aloud, his calm voice filling the silent room. Arthur watched from the doorway, his heart heavy with gratitude. That was the Ricardo he knew, loyal, kind, unwavering. What did he put in the juice? Arthur asked, more to himself than to her, testing the weight of the words on his tongue. It was a white powder, from a small paper packet, with nothing written on it. He crumpled it in his hand and threw it away in the trash near the registers, she replied, her photographic memory providing details Arthur hadn't asked for. He always checked if anyone was looking, but he never looked down. No one ever looks at the children. The specificity of that detail, the paper packet, the trash near the registers, sent a new chill down his spine. It was so concrete, so unlike a vague invention. The blind trust he placed in Ricardo was the foundation of his multi-million-dollar empire and his personal life. If that foundation cracked, everything would crumble. He looked at Leah, at the carton of milk she still held like a shield. She wasn't asking for more money. She didn't seem to be lying. She seemed to be handing him a terrible burden, one she had carried alone for too long. I need to think, Arthur stammered. The certainty of minutes ago was dissolving into a fog of doubt. His obsession with control demanded facts, proof, logic. Leah's story had none of that, only the chilling conviction of an unlikely eyewitness. He made a decision. He couldn't dismiss the story, but he also couldn't accept it. He needed to verify it, discreetly, without Ricardo knowing. If he was wrong, no one needed to know about his momentary insanity. If he was right, he couldn't even contemplate that possibility. Come, he said to Leah, his voice now firm with a newfound purpose. First, we'll take care of you and your brother. Then, I'll find out the truth." He led her out of the grocery store, the warm afternoon air hitting his face. Reality seemed altered, colors duller, sounds distant. He held the key to his luxury car in his hand, a symbol of power that suddenly felt useless. He could buy anything, influence any business. But he couldn't buy the truth or undo what he had just heard. As he walked towards his car, an image flooded his mind. Helena's smile, vibrant and full of life, and then the faded version of her last days. And for the first time, he wondered what or who had stolen that smile. The doubt, once planted, began to take deep, dark roots in his heart. The place Leah called home was a grey brick building with stained windows. Tucked away on a street forgotten by the city's prosperity, the smell of dampness and cheap disinfectant hung in the air of the dimly lit hallway. Arthur followed the girl up a creaking staircase, feeling like an intruder in a world of deprivation he only knew through charity reports and tax-deductible donations. Leah opened a door with a key attached to a string around her neck, revealing a small, Spartan room. On a thin mattress on the floor, a small boy lay huddled under a worn blanket, his breathing wheezy and shallow. This was Theo. His face was pale, with dark circles under his closed eyes, and a dry, persistent cough racked his fragile body. The sight hit Arthur with the force of a punch to the gut. It was more than malnutrition. The boy was genuinely sick. "He's been like this for a long time," Leah whispered, going to her brother and placing the milk in a small wooden box beside the mattress. "And the lady who runs this place says it's just a cold. She gives us syrup, but it doesn't help her." Arthur knelt beside the boy, concern overriding cultural shock. He touched Theo's forehead. It was warm, but not feverish. His skin was dry, almost brittle. It was the lethargy, the fragility in his limbs that most alarmed him. It seemed like the same inexplicable exhaustion that had consumed Helena, a depletion that went beyond physical weariness. His mind, now poisoned by doubt, began connecting dots he never would have dared to align. What if it wasn't just Helena? What if what Leah saw wasn't an isolated act, but part of something larger? As he examined the boy, a stout woman with a sour face appeared in the doorway. "Who are you? No unauthorized visits allowed," she said, her voice heavy with suspicion. Arthur stood, his imposing presence filling the small room. He pulled a card from his wallet. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm a family friend. I'm taking the children to a doctor's appointment." His voice left no room for argument. The money and power he normally used to close deals now served a much more urgent purpose. He watched the hesitation on the woman's face turn into a quick calculation of opportunity. She was likely more concerned with shedding responsibility than with the children's welfare. Minutes later, he was back in his car, Leah beside him and Theo, wrapped in his expensive coat in the back seat. He called his private physician Dr. Albright, a discreet and efficient man who had been on his payroll for years. "I need you at the hospital. Full exams for a child. Absolute confidentiality," he ordered, without giving further details. The gears of his life, accustomed to moving the world to meet his needs, began to turn. At the private medical center, where walls were adorned with art and the air smelled of fresh flowers, not antiseptic, Theo was immediately taken to a pediatric suite. As doctors and nurses worked, Arthur sat with Leah in the waiting room. She was quiet, her eyes absorbing the unfamiliar luxury around her, but her posture remained tense. "What does your friend do?" she suddenly asked, breaking the silence. "He's my partner," Arthur replied, the word sounding strange. "We handle investments, stocks, funds, cryptocurrencies, complicated things." "Is he rich like you?" she continued. "Yes, almost," Arthur admitted. Ricardo had always subtly resented being in Arthur's shadow. Having considerable wealth but not the same level of capital or recognition, Arthur had always dismissed it as friendly competitiveness. Now, he wondered if it was something darker. Dr. Albright appeared a few hours later, his face serious. "Arthur, can I speak with you privately?" They went into his office. "What does he have, Alfonso? Is it serious?" "It's peculiar," the doctor said, choosing his words carefully. "His blood tests show a range of deficiencies, as expected. But there's more. We found traces of unusual compounds. They're not common poisons. Nothing a standard toxicological screen would detect. These are substances that, in small, continuous doses, can mimic the symptoms of autoimmune diseases or neurological disorders. They cause chronic fatigue, mental confusion, muscle deterioration. Arthur, the symptoms are terribly similar to Helena's." The floor seemed to give way beneath Arthur's feet. The horrific suspicion he had tried to suppress now solidified into a cold, medical truth. It wasn't just a scared child story. There was something real, something tangible in Theo's blood. "Oh, what are these substances?" Arthur asked, his voice a thread. "They're complex. Some are heavy metal derivatives, others are obscure botanical compounds. The combination is sophisticated, designed to be slow, gradual, and virtually undetectable, designed to look like a natural tragedy." Arthur returned to the waiting room, the doctor's report weighing in his hand like a sentence. He looked at Leah, the little guardian of secrets, who watched him with silent expectation. She hadn't just saved him from a mistake, she had given him the key to unravel a nightmare. He knelt in front of her, the immense disparity between their worlds vanishing in that moment of shared truth. "Leah," he said, his voice choked, "you were right. Something very bad happened to Helena. And I think the same thing is happening to your brother." Leah's eyes filled with tears, not of surprise, but of terrifying relief. The burden she carried was no longer hers alone, but as Arthur prepared to ensure she and her brother would be safe, a nurse rushed into the room, her face pale with panic. "Mr. Sterling, the boy. He's gone from his room." Panic was a cold wave that swept through the hospital's aseptic calm. Arthur felt his blood run cold. Theo, gone. The fragile boy, the epicenter of that horrible discovery, was no longer there. Arthur's mind, trained to analyze market threats and business strategies, entered crisis mode. This wasn't a casual disappearance. Someone had taken him, someone who knew he was there, someone who knew what his presence meant. Ricardo's name screamed in his mind, no longer as a suspicion, but as a growing, terrifying certainty. He had underestimated his partner, underestimated his cruelty, his audacity. While Arthur moved pieces on an investigation board, Ricardo was already 3 steps ahead. "Lock down the hospital," Arthur's voice boomed down the corridor, filled with an authority no one dared to question. "No one in, no one out. Check all exits, all security cameras. Now!" The security guards, accustomed to dealing with celebrities and politicians, sprang into action. Leah clutched Arthur's leg, her small body trembling uncontrollably. The courage that had sustained her for so long finally broke, replaced by pure, childish fear for her brother. Arthur scooped her up, an instinctive, protective gesture. He felt her fragility, the weight of her dependence, and a protective fury surged within him, so fierce it surprised him. These children were no longer strangers. They were his responsibility. He headed to the security room, Leah in his arms. The screens showed dozens of angles of the hospital. "Show me the footage from the pediatric corridor for the last 20 minutes, he ordered the head of security. The images appeared, grainy and black and white. They saw the nurse enter and exit. They saw Dr. Albright go to meet Arthur. And then they saw a figure, a man dressed in a janitor's uniform, pushing a large laundry cart. The man wore a cap and kept his face down, but there was something in his bearing, in his way of moving, that seemed familiar. He stopped in front of Theo's room, looked both ways down the corridor, and entered. Less than a minute later, he emerged, pushing the cart, which now seemed visibly heavier, the canvas stretched over an irregular shape. He moved with deliberate calm, passing a nurse who didn't even glance his way. "Zoom in on his face," Arthur said, his heart hammering against his ribs. The image was enlarged, the quality deteriorating. The face was obscured, but for a second, the man lifted his head to glance at a room number. That second was enough. It wasn't Ricardo, it was a stranger, but that didn't absolve his partner. On the contrary, it made everything worse. It meant Ricardo wasn't acting alone. He had resources, people at his disposal, capable of infiltrating a high-security hospital and abducting a child right under everyone's noses. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was an operation. As Arthur processed this information, his cell phone rang. Ricardo's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, Arthur hesitated, the urge to ignore the call, battling the need to hear the voice of the man he once called brother. He answered, putting it on speaker so the head of security could hear. "Arthur, where have you been? We have that meeting with the Japanese investors in an hour." Ricardo's voice was the same as always, warm, a little impatient, completely normal. That normalcy was what made it so frightening. "I had an unforeseen issue, Ricardo. I'll have to cancel," Arthur said, striving to keep his voice steady. There was a pause. "An unforeseen issue? Is everything okay? You sound off." "I'm fine," Arthur lied. "Just a family matter." "Family?" Ricardo chuckled, a laugh that had always seemed friendly, but now sounded hollow and sinister. "Since when do you have family besides me, old friend? Look, whatever it is, sort it out quickly. The estate doesn't manage itself, you know." The casual euphemism about his estate, the reminder of their mutual dependence in business, felt like a veiled threat. "Get back in the game, Arthur. Pretend nothing happened." "I'll call you later," Arthur said and hung up. He turned to the head of security. "The man in the video, I need to know who he is. And I need a copy of all the footage. Don't call the police." Not yet. He couldn't trust the authorities. Not yet. Ricardo had connections. His wealth bought influence in places Arthur couldn't even imagine. An official investigation could be stifled, evidence could disappear, and, most importantly, Theo's life would be at risk. He was alone in this. He and a 6-year-old girl against an enemy wearing the face of his best friend. He took Leah to a private room, trying to calm her, though his own world was crumbling. "We'll find him, Leah, I promise." She looked at him, tears drying on her face, leaving dirty streaks. "He doesn't know why they took him," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "He'll be so scared." Arthur's cell phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number, no text, just a photo. It was Theo, asleep in a room Arthur didn't recognize. He seemed to be okay, but the implicit message was crystal clear. "I have him. He's safe. For now. Your move." Arthur looked at the photo, then at Leah's terrified face. He saw the trap. Ricardo didn't want to hurt Theo, not yet. He wanted him as collateral, leverage to control Arthur, to force him to abandon his search for the truth. Ricardo knew Arthur was investigating. The hospital visit had been a tactical error. He had shown his hand, and then a second message arrived from the same number. This time, with words. "She trusted me more than you in the end. She told me secrets she never told you. Want to know what they are?" The message burned on his phone screen, each word an incandescent ember embedding itself in Arthur's mind. "She trusted me more than you in the end." The assertion was more cruel than any physical threat. It didn't just attack his present, but rewrote his past, poisoning the memories he so painstakingly strove to preserve. Helena's image, pure and untouched in his mental sanctuary, began to crack. What if Ricardo wasn't just lying to torture him? What if there was a grain of truth to it? Doubt was a slow toxin spreading through his veins, paralyzing him. Ricardo wasn't just playing chess, he was waging psychological warfare, and the battlefield was Arthur's heart. He looked at Leah, who watched him with silent intensity. She didn't need to read the message to understand its impact. She had seen the color drain from Arthur's face, his commanding posture crumble for an instant. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted. He was no longer just the rich, powerful protector. He was a wounded man, as vulnerable as she. Ignoring the poisonous message, Arthur focused on what mattered: Theo's safety. The message was bait, designed to destabilize him, to make him act on impulse, on emotion, his obsession with control. Once a hallmark of his business success, now became his armor. He needed to be methodical, cold, calculating. He needed to treat this as the most hostile takeover of his life, where the asset at stake was a child's life. "He's trying to distract me," Arthur said, more to himself than to Leah. "He wants me to chase ghosts so he can hide what's right in front of me." He began issuing orders. He called a former military operative who headed his private security, a man named Jonas, whose loyalty was absolute and whose methods were discreet. "Jonas, code red situation. I need full surveillance on Ricardo Amaral, 24/7, tracker on his car, bugs, everything you can do without detection. He took something that belongs to me, and I want you to find the man from the hospital video. No limits on resources. Find him." As Jonas began mobilizing his team, Arthur took care of Leah. He brought her to his penthouse, a sprawling space of glass and steel that overlooked the city. It was a world of sterile luxury, a place where he rarely felt at home. To Leah, it must have seemed like a palace from another planet. He settled her in a guest room larger than the entire shelter where she had lived, with a private bathroom and a breathtaking view. He asked one of his household staff, a middle-aged woman named Sophia, to look after her, ensuring she ate and rested. But Leah couldn't rest. She wandered through the apartment, touching the smooth surfaces, gazing at abstract art pieces, a tiny figure lost amidst wealth that held no meaning for her. All she wanted was her brother. Arthur set up a makeshift command center in his office, the screens that usually displayed stock market tickers now showing hospital blueprints, the kidnapper's face, and a city map. Adrenaline kept him alert. He didn't eat, didn't sleep. The pain of Ricardo's betrayal was a raw energy that fueled him. He replayed conversations, dinners, business trips, searching for signs he had missed. Ricardo's subtle resentment, his casual comments about Arthur's luck, his insistence on managing certain investment funds Arthur considered secondary. Everything looked different now, pieces of a puzzle forming a gruesome picture. Late that afternoon, Jonas called. "We've got something, the man from the video." His name is Marcus Faraz, a former security guard, fired for misconduct. He's got gambling debts. We found a significant payment in his account this morning, coming from a shell company. And guess who owns that company? "Ricardo," Arthur said, without surprise. It was the confirmation he needed. Exactly. And there's more. Faraz made a stop at a compounding pharmacy downtown before going to the hospital. "We're checking what he bought. And the tracker on Ricardo's car shows him heading to a rural property outside the city, an old farm estate he bought as an investment last year." Arthur's heart leaped. Theo. He had to be there. He was about to tell Jonas to assemble a team and storm the place, but he hesitated. It would be exactly what Ricardo would expect, a direct, noisy, aggressive approach. Ricardo knew him well. He knew Arthur's impulsiveness. His tendency to solve problems with force and money was his greatest weakness, and with Theo inside, any mistake could be fatal. That's when Leah entered the office. She held a tablet she had found, and on the screen was a photo. It was an old picture of Arthur and Helena smiling on a boat, the sun glinting off their faces. "She was beautiful," Leah said, her voice low. "She looked happy." She was. Arthur replied, the ache in his chest deepening. Leah pointed at the photo. Your friend took this picture, she stated, not as a question. I know because he's in the reflection of her sunglasses. He wasn't smiling. Arthur took the tablet, zooming in on the image. There it was, tiny, distorted but unmistakable. Ricardo's reflection in the mirror of Helena's lenses. And Leah was right. Amidst a scene of contagious joy, Ricardo's face was a mask of coldness and something more, something that looked dangerously like possession. He wasn't looking at the camera, he was looking at Arthur. And in that instant, Arthur understood. The money, the businesses, the fortune, they were just tools. The real target was never his estate, it was him. Ricardo's message wasn't just psychological torture, it was a declaration of intent. Ricardo didn't want what Arthur had, he wanted what Arthur was. And to achieve that, he was willing to destroy everything and everyone Arthur loved. The obsession wasn't with Helena, the obsession was with him. The realization hit him with nauseating clarity. He was caught in a sick game, and the rules had just changed in a way he never could have predicted. The revelation crashed down on Arthur like a concrete slab, crushing the air from his lungs and reconfiguring his entire perception of reality. The obsession was with him. The realization was so bizarre, so contrary to everything he understood about human relationships, that for a moment his brain refused to process it. He and Ricardo were friends, almost brothers. They competed in business, celebrated victories together, supported each other through losses. But beneath that facade of camaraderie, a twisted, possessive sentiment had grown, like a poisonous weed. Helena wasn't the object of Ricardo's desire, but rather an obstacle. And now, the children too. They were pawns in a game whose ultimate prize was total control over Arthur's life and loyalty. This new perspective changed everything. It was no longer a simple story of greed. It was the story of a betrayal so profound and calculated it bordered on insanity. Arthur looked at the photo on the tablet, at the tiny reflection in Helena's glasses. Years of friendship unraveled in that instant, replaced by a sense of violation. Every supportive gesture from Ricardo, every word of comfort, every business counsel, all were now tainted, transformed into an act of manipulation. The blind trust he had placed in his friend wasn't a virtue. It was a vulnerability Ricardo had methodically exploited. With chilling calm, Arthur closed his eyes. The impulsive anger that had dominated him before gave way to a cutting coldness. He could no longer afford to react. He had to think. Ricardo believed he knew him, that he could predict his moves. The only way to win was to become someone Ricardo wouldn't recognize, not the impetuous businessman who solved everything with force, but a patient, relentless strategist. He turned to Leah, who still watched him with her keen eyes. "Leah," he said, his voice level, "you showed me something I never would have seen on my own. Your ability to see what others overlook. That's our greatest advantage." The girl seemed to grow a little with the praise. "I just say what I see," she replied with simplicity. "And what do you see now?" he asked, genuinely curious. She thought for a moment. "I see a man who lost his map, but who still knows where he needs to go." The wisdom in her words struck him. It was true. The map of his past was a lie, but the destination, saving Theo and getting justice, remained clear. Arthur picked up the phone, but didn't call Jonas. Instead, he dialed another number. It was Helena. Not her. It was a private investigator he had discreetly hired weeks after her death, driven by an unease he couldn't name. He had asked the man, a former police detective named Miller, to investigate Helena's rare illness under the guise of contributing to medical research. Until now, Miller had found nothing conclusive. "Miller," Arthur said when the man answered, "change the focus of the investigation. Forget the illness. Investigate Ricardo Amaral. Every aspect of his life. Finances, relationships, travels. I want to know down to the brand of his shaving cream. And, Miller, be invisible. He can't dream he's being watched. Next, he called his lawyer. Prepare the documents to assume temporary guardianship of 2 children, Leah and Theo, full names unknown, ages 6 and 4. No bureaucracy, no questions. Use my name, my influence, whatever it takes. I want this on my desk tomorrow morning. Finally, he called Ricardo. It was time to play his part in the game. He took a deep breath, forcing a tone of exhaustion and defeat into his voice. Ricardo, I'm sorry about earlier today. You were right. I'm not well. I've been confused since Helena passed. On the other end of the line, Ricardo's silence was charged with contained triumph. I know, friend. I know. I'm here for you. What happened? It's complicated. I found a child, the daughter of a former employee. The situation shook me. I think I need some time, maybe a trip, get out of town for a few days to clear my head. It was bait. Arthur was giving Ricardo exactly what he wanted, the impression that he was pulling away, emotionally unstable and vulnerable. Ricardo would take the bait, thinking his plan was working, that Arthur was turning to him for support. Of course, Arthur. That's a great idea, Ricardo said, the feigned concern in his voice making Arthur's stomach churn. I'll take care of everything here, the businesses, the investments. Don't worry about a thing. Just rest. Where are you thinking of going? I don't know yet. Maybe the beach house, Arthur lied. I need to be alone. Understood. Call me if you need anything at all. Hanging up, he looked at the map on his computer screen, at the dot indicating Ricardo's farm estate. He wasn't going to the beach house. He wasn't going to run. He was going to hunt, but not in the way Ricardo expected. He wouldn't use brute force. He would use the most powerful weapon Ricardo had given him, the perception that Arthur Sterling was a broken, predictable man. He turned to Leah. We're going to get your brother back, but we're going to do it our way. For the first time since he'd met her, Leah offered a small, hesitant smile. The unlikely alliance between the billionaire and the orphaned girl was sealed. They were no longer victim and savior, they were partners. And while Ricardo celebrated his apparent victory, the true threat to his empire of lies was silently forming in the glass and steel penthouse, fueled by a child's photographic memory, and the cold fury of a man who had just discovered his entire life was a stage. The curtain was about to rise for the final act, and the script had been rewritten. Over the next 2 days, Arthur Sterling transformed. The grief that had cloaked him like a shroud for a year was replaced by a chilling clarity. He operated with the precision of a general preparing for battle, every move calculated, every emotion locked away. In his penthouse, which had become a command center, he and Leah formed the most improbable duo. While he coordinated Jonas and Miller via encrypted phones, Leah sat in a large leather armchair, studying photos and blueprints of Ricardo's farm estate that Jonas had obtained. Her photographic memory, once a tool for street survival, was now an invaluable strategic asset. There are 4 cameras outside, she said, pointing at a tablet screen. 1 at the main gate, 1 at the front door, 1 in the back near the barn, and another pointing at the access road. But there isn't one at this window here. She indicated a small window on the 2nd floor, partially obscured by a climbing vine. It's the bathroom. People never put cameras in bathrooms. Arthur looked at the image, impressed. He would have focused on disabling the existing cameras. Leah found a system flaw. And the man who took Theo? Marcus? Arthur asked. He was seen buying food at a convenience store 10 miles from the farm estate, Jonas reported by phone. Food for at least 2 and diapers. The boy's there. The confirmation sent a wave of relief and urgency through Arthur. Theo was alive. But for how long? Ricardo wasn't stupid. Arthur's trip would only buy him limited time. Meanwhile, Detective Miller began unearthing Ricardo's past. The discoveries were subtle, but disturbing. For years, Ricardo had been siphoning off small amounts from secondary investment funds, moving the money through a complex network of offshore accounts. It wasn't enough to raise immediate suspicion, but the accumulated total was significant. He was building a nest egg, an escape fund. But the most alarming was a personal discovery. Miller found records of a cold case police investigation from 15 years ago. A former girlfriend of Ricardo's had suffered a domestic accident, a fall down the stairs. She survived, but with severe neurological damage. The investigation was closed due to lack of evidence, but the lead investigator's notes expressed strong doubts about the accidental nature of the event. Arthur felt a chill. The pattern was there, silently eliminating those in his way, in a manner that seemed natural or accidental. The ex-girlfriend, Helena, and who else? The web was larger and older than he imagined. The relationship between Arthur and Leah deepened with each hour. He found himself explaining complex business concepts and strategies to her, and the girl absorbed everything with surprising comprehension. She, in turn, taught him to see the world differently, to pay attention to details, to hesitations in someone's voice, to the way a person's eyes didn't match their smile. He fed her, ensured she slept, and even managed to coax some laughs from her with clumsy stories about his own childhood. In the midst of that crisis, a strange and fragile semblance of a family began to form. He wasn't just fighting for justice for Helena, he was fighting for the future of those two children. On the second night, Ricardo called. His tone was casual, but Arthur detected a note of impatience. "So, friend, is the beach air doing you good?" "It's helping me think, Ricardo," Arthur replied, maintaining the facade of a lost man. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the company. Maybe it's time for me to step back a bit more, let you take full control. You were always better with the day-to-day details. My estate would be in good hands." He was offering Ricardo the ultimate prize, placing it on a silver platter. If Ricardo accepted, it would confirm his greed. But Ricardo's response surprised him. "Don't be foolish, Arthur. The company is ours. We built it together. I don't want your estate. I want my partner back, strong and focused. Come home. We'll get through this together like we always have." The words were perfect, the embodiment of loyalty. But Arthur could now hear the dissonance behind the melody. Ricardo didn't want the company without him. He wanted him there, dependent, controlled. The obsession truly was the engine of everything. Money was secondary. "Maybe you're right," Arthur said, sounding defeated. "I'll be back tomorrow." Hanging up, he looked at Leah. "He's expecting me to return to the cage. He'll let his guard down tonight, certain he's won." "That's when we get Theo," Leah said, her voice firm. The plan was set. Jonas and his team would create a distraction miles away, a simulated wildfire that would draw the attention of the area's few police patrols. Meanwhile, Arthur and a small team would approach the farm estate. They wouldn't invade, they would infiltrate, using the blind spot Leah had found. The goal wasn't confrontation. It was to extract Theo silently and disappear into the night. As they prepared, donning dark clothing and checking night vision equipment, Arthur felt a fear he hadn't known in years. It wasn't the fear of losing money on the stock market. It was the visceral fear of failing the people who depended on him. He looked at Leah, who was adjusting a small backpack with a water bottle and a cracker for her brother. She didn't look scared. She looked determined. "Leah," he said, kneeling in front of her, "I want you to stay here with Sophia. It's too dangerous." The girl met his gaze, her eyes large and serious. "You need me," she said without arrogance. "You see the big picture. I see the small details that can kill you. Theo is my brother. I'm going." Arthur looked into those eyes and saw a strength that mirrored his own. He couldn't argue. She was no longer a passenger in his quest. She was his navigator. "All right," he conceded, "but you stay behind me the entire time." She nodded. Together, They descended the service elevator, met Jonas's team in the underground parking garage, and entered an unmarked black van. As the vehicle slid silently into the city's darkness, Arthur knew he was crossing a point of no return. The man who had left to buy wine at an upscale grocery store a few days ago no longer existed. In his place was someone forged in the fire of betrayal, with a clear mission, and by his side, the unlikely guardian of secrets, whose sharp vision was the key to unraveling the darkness that lay ahead. The dark van moved like a phantom along the rural roads, headlights off, navigating only by the pale moonlight and a state-of-the-art GPS. Inside, the silence was tense, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the restrained breathing of its occupants. Arthur felt every jolt of the dirt road, adrenaline pulsing through his veins like a constant drum. Beside him, Leah was still, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside, as if she could see through it. She wasn't a scared child being dragged into danger. She was a sentinel, her supernatural calm lending Arthur strength. Jonas, in the front passenger seat, spoke into a lapel mic. Diversion initiated. Emergency units are en route to the site, 10 miles east. The road to the farm estate is clear. We're 5 minutes out. The van stopped in a dense wood, about half a mile from the property. The doors opened without a click. Arthur, Jonas, Leah, and 2 other men from the security team, all dressed in black, stepped out into the cold night. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. In the distance, they could see the faint lights of the farmhouse, a solitary island of light in an ocean of darkness. Leah, "Stay close," Arthur whispered, and her small hand found his, tiny yet firm. They moved through the woods with practiced discipline, their boots barely rustling the fallen leaves. Arthur, who had spent most of his life in boardrooms and private jets, discovered a primal focus within him. Every sound, every shadow was amplified. Theo and Leah's safety was the only thing on his mind, a mantra that silenced fear. They reached the edge of the clearing where the house stood. It was an old 2-story structure with a wraparound porch. A single car was parked out front, not Ricardo's, but an older sedan, likely belonging to Marcus Ferraz. Lights were on only downstairs, in the living room. "The cameras are exactly where you said," Jonas murmured to Leah, a tone of respect in his voice. "The bathroom window is dark. That's our best bet." The plan was simple. One of Jonas's men would use a device to create a brief short circuit in the house's electrical system, a blackout of no more than 30 seconds. In that interval of darkness and confusion, Arthur and Jonas would climb a trellis leading to the bathroom window. Leah would remain at the base with the other man as a lookout. They waited, seconds dragging like minutes. Arthur looked at Leah. She was staring fixedly at the house, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What is it?" he whispered. "The curtain," she replied, pointing to an upstairs window next to the bathroom. It moved, but there's no light in that room, and no wind. A shiver ran down Arthur's spine. Someone was up there, in the dark, watching. Their plan, which had seemed so solid, suddenly had a dangerous flaw. Could Ricardo be there? No, his tracker showed him at his city penthouse, likely awaiting Arthur's call in the morning. So, who? Before they could reconsider, the signal came. Jonas gestured, "Now." The man with the device pressed a button. The house lights flickered and died, plunging the property into total darkness. Simultaneously, Arthur and Jonas dashed across the grass. Arthur was the first to reach the trellis. He climbed, his muscles protesting the unaccustomed exertion. He was strong, but it was gym strength, not field strength. Jonas was right behind him. They reached the bathroom window. It was unlocked, as they had predicted. Jonas silently slid it open and entered, with Arthur right behind him. They were inside. The air was stale and heavy. They switched on small headlamps, their beams cutting through the darkness. They stepped out of the bathroom into a dim hallway. To their left, the stairs led down. To their right, 2 bedrooms. The curtain Leah had seen move belonged to the first room. Jonas gestured towards the door. Arthur nodded. Weapon drawn, Jonas kicked the door open. The room was mostly empty, save for a bed and a dresser. And, sitting in a chair in the corner, was Theo. He was awake, his large, scared eyes reflecting the light from their headlamps, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, holding a small device in his hand, was a man Arthur had never seen before. It wasn't Marcus Ferraz. The man was thin, with cold eyes and a thin, cruel smile. "A good evening, Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice calm and mocking. "Ricardo told me you'd be impulsive, but I must admit, bringing a child on a rescue, that's a new level of recklessness." Arthur froze, his heart in his throat. It was a trap. Ricardo knew he would come. The trip to the beach, the phone call, it had all been theater to lure him there. The man raised the device in his hand. It was a detonator. "This house is full of surprises, Mr. Sterling, just like your dear friend Ricardo. If you or your men take another step, we're all going to have a very explosive night. Now, how about dropping your weapons and joining us? The show is just beginning." Behind them, in the hallway, they heard footsteps. Marcus Ferraz appeared at the top of the stairs, blocking their only exit. They hadn't infiltrated a hostage house. They had walked straight into a cage, and the door had just slammed shut behind them. The reality of the trap crashed down on Arthur with overwhelming weight. The air in the room grew thin, heavy with the scent of mildew and the tension of imminent threat. The smile of the man with the detonator was the embodiment of predatory calm. He wasn't a mere henchman. He was a professional. Ricardo had left nothing to chance. Every move Arthur made had been anticipated, every weakness exploited. The generous impulsiveness that had led him to help Leah at the grocery store was the same impulsiveness that now placed him and everyone trying to help him in mortal danger. Jonas remained motionless, his weapon still aimed, but his body taut as a steel cable. He assessed the options, calculating distances and reaction times, but the equation was grim. The man with the detonator, Marcus blocking the exit, and Theo, the small, fragile center of it all, well within the enemy's reach. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the thin man said, noting the calculation in Jonas's eyes. "The device is motion sensitive. If I fall, it detonates. A beautiful fail-safe." Arthur slowly lowered his weapon and placed it on the floor. He signaled Jonas to do the same. Physical confrontation was out of the question. He needed to buy time. He needed to use his only remaining weapon, his mind. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, his voice surprisingly steady. "Let's just say I'm a problem resolution consultant," the man replied. "And your partner, Mr. Amaral, has a very big problem. You." Theo, who until then had been paralyzed with fear, let out a low whimper. His eyes met Arthur's, a silent plea that tore at the billionaire's heart. He needed to get that boy out of there. "What does Ricardo want?" Arthur asked, maintaining eye contact with the kidnapper. "My money, my companies. He can have it all. Leave the children out of this." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Ah, Mr. Sterling, you still don't understand, do you? This was never about your estate. Ricardo already has access to more money than he can spend thanks to your trust. No, this is about rebalancing the scales, about him finally stepping out of your shadow. He doesn't want your assets. He wants your life, not to end it, but to possess it. He wants you to depend on him, to need him. He wants to be your savior after having been the architect of your ruin." The sick truth of Ricardo's obsession, now verbalized by a stranger, was even more repulsive. Arthur felt nauseated. His entire life with his friend flashed before his eyes like a distorted film. Downstairs, Leah heard footsteps overhead and the murmur of voices. The man who had stayed with her, a security guard named Pedro, held her, ready to retreat. But Leah tugged his arm. "No," she whispered urgently. "It's a trap. They've been caught." Pedro looked at her, incredulous. "How do you know?" "I know," she insisted. "The plan was silent. It's not silent up there." Her childish, yet incredibly logical mind processed the situation. They couldn't enter and they couldn't flee. If they fled, they would abandon Arthur and Jonas. If they entered, they would be captured too. She looked around, her eyes sweeping the darkness, searching for a detail, an anomaly, anything the others hadn't seen. And then she saw it. A thin, almost invisible wire running from the base of the house to an old barn about 50 yards away. It wasn't a common electrical wire. It was a detonation cord, barely buried beneath the grass. The detonator. The entire house was the trap. She tugged Pedro's sleeve harder. "The barn," she whispered, pointing. "The wire goes there." Upstairs, Arthur tried to negotiate. "If I surrender, you let everyone go." "The boy, my men." The thin man smiled. "How generous, but that's not the plan. The plan is for a tragic accident tonight. A gas leak, perhaps. The great Arthur Sterling, distraught with grief, heroically attempting to rescue a child abducted by a disgruntled employee. Marcus here." He gestured to Faraz. "Unfortunately, everyone dies in the explosion. Except you. You'll be found tomorrow, wandering in shock, the sole survivor. A broken hero, and who will be there to pick up the pieces? Your loyal friend, Ricardo. He'll have you exactly where he wants you, powerless, grateful, and eternally in his debt." The plan was diabolical in its perfection. It would destroy Jonas's reputation, eliminate the witnesses, Theo and Marcus, and leave Arthur completely isolated and psychologically shattered. That's when a sound cut through the night. A car alarm, piercing and insistent. It came from Marcus's sedan. The sound was a knife in the silent tension, making everyone jump. The man with the detonator frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Marcus, go shut that damn thing off." Marcus hesitated, reluctant to leave his post on the stairs. "But, go," the thin man ordered. Marcus scurried down the stairs. The moment he left, the house lights began to flicker again, turning on and off in an erratic pattern. "What's going on?" the thin man snarled, his composure finally breaking. Arthur didn't know, but he saw an opportunity. The distraction. He looked at Jonas. Jonas understood. Outside, Pedro looked at Leah with admiration. The girl had found the house's external fuse box, protected by a simple latch. With a bobby pin she pulled from her pocket, she was picking the lock. She activated the car alarm using a device Pedro had and was now manipulating the circuit breakers, creating electrical chaos. "Get ready," she told Pedro, her voice tiny but full of command. "When the main barn light comes on, cut the wire." She didn't know what would happen, but she knew she needed to separate the detonator from the main charge. It was her only move. Inside the house, capitalizing on the confusion, Arthur took a slow step towards Theo. "Enough games," he said to the thin man. "Whatever Ricardo's paying you, I'll double it, triple it. You think you can buy everyone, don't you, Sterling?" The man scoffed, but his eyes flickered for a fraction of a second towards the window, distracted by the flashing lights. It was the opening Jonas needed. He didn't go for the man. He dropped to the floor, rolling towards Theo, using his body as a shield. At the same time, Arthur lunged forward, not to attack, but to interpose himself between the detonator and the children. The thin man, caught off guard, screamed in rage and pressed the button. A click echoed in the silent room, and nothing happened. The harmless click of the detonator hung in the air for a second that felt like an eternity. The thin man's face twisted into a mask of disbelief and fury. He pressed the button again and again, the hollow, impotent sound echoing the catastrophic failure of his plan. Outside, at the exact moment he first pressed the button, Pedro, following Leah's precise instruction, had severed the detonation cord with insulated pliers, the resulting spark briefly illuminating his determined face. The connection was broken. The threat neutralized. The thin man's confusion was all the window they needed. Jonas, already shielding Theo with his body, reached out and pulled the boy closer. Arthur, moving with a speed he didn't know he possessed, lunged forward and delivered a single, powerful punch to the kidnapper's chin. The man fell backward, hitting his head against the wall and slumping unconscious to the floor. Downstairs, Marcus Ferraz, returning from turning off the car alarm, heard the thud and began rushing up the stairs. But Pedro, alerted by Leah, was already at the back door. He intercepted him in the kitchen, and the fight was brief and one-sided. The former operative subdued the indebted security guard with brutal efficiency. In the bedroom, Arthur rushed to Theo. The boy was trembling, but unharmed, his eyes wide with fear and relief. "Theo," Arthur said, his voice choked. "It's okay. I'm here. We're going to take you to your sister." He scooped the boy into his arms, and the small, fragile body clung to him with desperate strength. The weight of Theo in his arms was the most real thing Arthur had felt in a year. It wasn't a financial asset or a number on a spreadsheet. It was a life he had almost lost. Jonas tied up the unconscious man and swept the house, ensuring there were no more surprises. Minutes later, they descended. At the front door, Leah waited, her face pale under the porch light. When she saw Theo, a sob escaped her lips. She ran to them, and Arthur knelt so the siblings could embrace. It was a silent, desperate reunion, two halves of a whole reuniting. Leah stroked Theo's hair, whispering words of comfort, while tears finally ran freely down her face. Arthur watched the scene, his heart heavy with a mixture of overwhelming emotions, relief, anger, and a protective tenderness that surprised him. He looked at Jonas. "No one calls the police. Take these two somewhere safe. They're our only proof against Ricardo." "And you?" Jonas asked. "I have breakfast with my best friend," Arthur said, his voice icy. They returned to the city before dawn. The children, exhausted, fell asleep in the back of the van, their hands still clasped. Arthur watched them in the rearview mirror. The sight of them, safe and together, solidified his resolve. This wouldn't end with Ricardo's arrest. This had exposed a much deeper rot in his own life and in the system that allowed children like Leah and Theo to become invisible. He left the children at the penthouse under Sophia and Jonas's care, with strict orders not to open the door to anyone. Then he went home, showered, and put on one of his most expensive suits, the armor for the final battle. He found Ricardo at his favorite coffee shop, a sunny spot where they had closed some of their biggest deals. Ricardo smiled, his face the picture of friendly concern. "Arthur, you look better. Did the trip do you good?" "It clarified many things, Ricardo," Arthur said, taking a seat. He looked at the man across from him, the man he had known for 20 years. He tried to see the monster behind the mask, but only saw the familiar face, the rehearsed jokes, the false camaraderie. That's what made him so dangerous. He was a poison disguised as medicine. "I've been thinking," Arthur began, keeping his voice calm, "about what you said, about us getting through things together. You're right. There are certain things that need to be resolved, certain liabilities that need to be eliminated." Ricardo leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. He thought Arthur was talking business, about optimizing his investment portfolio. "I'm listening." "What do you have in mind?" Arthur took out his cell phone and placed it on the table, screen up. He pressed a button. A recording began to play. It was the voice of the thin man from the previous night, captured by a microphone Jonas had remotely activated. "Ricardo told me you'd be impulsive. The plan is for a tragic accident. He'll have you exactly where he wants you. Powerless, grateful, and eternally in his debt." The color drained from Ricardo's face. The friendly smile collapsed, replaced by an expression of panic and contained fury. He looked around, but the cafe was full, and the voice on the recording was clear and unmistakable. "What?" "What is that?" he stammered, the facade finally cracking. "That," Arthur said, leaning forward, his voice a lethal whisper, "is game over. You didn't want my businesses, Ricardo. You wanted my soul, but you forgot one thing." "What?" Ricardo asked, his voice weak. Arthur looked directly into his eyes, the contempt and pain of 20 years of betrayed friendship in his gaze. "My soul wasn't for sale, and you underestimated the witnesses. You thought no one was paying attention, but you were wrong." He gestured towards the cafe entrance. Ricardo turned. Standing there, watching him, were Detective Miller and two tall men in suits who didn't look like coffee shop patrons. And, beside them, was an unexpected figure. Ricardo's ex-girlfriend, Anna, the woman who had supposedly suffered an accident years ago. Though physically frail, her eyes burned with a rediscovered strength. Miller had found her, and she was ready to talk. The moment of greatest tension wasn't a bang, but a profound silence that fell over the table, swallowing the casual hum of the coffee shop. Ricardo Amaral's world, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, collapsed in that instant. The sight of Anna, his ex-girlfriend, standing in the doorway, was a ghost of his first great sin, a living testimony that the past never truly dies. His face, once a blank canvas of panic, now settled into an expression of pure, cornered hatred, directed entirely at Arthur. The mask had fallen, revealing the predator beneath. "You," Ricardo hissed, the only word he could force from his tight throat. "You don't know what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," Arthur replied, his voice resonating with a glacial weight. I opened my eyes. "It took me a while, I admit. Your performance was almost perfect. The loyal friend, the supportive business partner, but performances have flaws, and you left the greatest witness of all right under your nose." Ricardo looked around, desperate, expecting Arthur to point to Miller or Anna, but Arthur continued, his voice low and piercing, meant only for Ricardo. "You never noticed her, did you? A small girl, in worn clothes, sitting quietly in a corner of the grocery store. To you, she was invisible, part of the landscape, but she saw everything. She saw the powder in my wife's juice. She saw the coldness in your eyes when you thought no one was looking. You, who planned every detail, who orchestrated the fall of an empire and the destruction of a life, were defeated by the memory of a 6-year-old child you deemed insignificant." Each word was a blow, dismantling Ricardo's arrogance, piece by piece. The idea that his ruin didn't come from a business rival or a police investigation, but from an anonymous orphan, was the ultimate humiliation. Miller and his men began walking towards the table. They weren't police. Arthur knew a conventional legal battle would be long and uncertain. With Ricardo's lawyers exploiting every loophole, the justice he sought needed to be more immediate and comprehensive. The men were specialists in security and asset recovery, hired to dismantle the parallel financial empire Ricardo had built. "What is this? What are you doing?" Ricardo asked, his voice rising an octave. "I'm protecting my assets," Arthur said, using Ricardo's own words against him. "As we speak, my legal team is freezing every account, every asset, every shell company you created with the money you siphoned from me for years. Your investments in tax havens, your secret bitcoins, the gold you kept in Swiss vaults, it's all gone. You built a house of cards with my resources, Ricardo, and I'm simply blowing it down." The panic in Ricardo's eyes was replaced by an existential terror. Money wasn't the goal, but it was his safety net, his power. Without it, he was just a man with dark secrets. Anna approached the table, her step uncertain, but her gaze firm. She stopped beside Arthur, staring at the man who had destroyed her life. 15 years, Ricardo," she said, her voice fragile but clear. 15 years living in fear, with a confused memory of what you did. But I remember your face hovering over me after you pushed me. I remember you whispering that it was for my own good." Anna's public confession, the recording, the presence of Miller's men. Everything converged. The other cafe patrons began to notice, cell phones discreetly raised to record. Ricardo's downfall wouldn't be a private matter. It would be a public spectacle. Desperate, Ricardo tried one last play. He turned to Arthur, the rage fading, replaced by a twisted plea. "Arthur, don't do this. Think of everything we've been through. We're brothers. I did this. I did all of this for you, to free you. Helena, she was weakening you, making you soft. I gave you your strength back. We could rule everything together." The final confession, the admission of his sick motivation, hung in the air, more damning than any legal proof. Arthur felt a knot of revulsion and pity. Pity for a man so broken, so consumed by envy, who confused destruction with love and control with friendship. "You know nothing about strength, Ricardo," Arthur said, standing. "And my strength didn't come from my money or my businesses. It came from her. It came from trust, from loyalty, things you never understood." He looked at Anna. "And it comes from people like her, who survive the evil you inflict. It comes from children like Leah and Theo, who find courage in the darkness." He left a small key on the table, the key to Ricardo's office locker. "Your personal belongings will be sent to you. Don't set foot in my company again. Don't set foot in my life again." Arthur turned and walked towards the exit, without looking back. He didn't need to see Miller's men escorting a defeated Ricardo. He didn't need to hear the whispers of the other patrons. He had done what needed to be done. Justice for Helena didn't come in the form of a prison sentence, but in the complete annihilation of her tormentor's world. He had stripped Ricardo of his power, his wealth, and most importantly, the facade that allowed him to operate. He had left him naked, exposed to the light, stepping out into the sunny street. Arthur didn't feel the triumph he expected. He felt a profound emptiness. He had won the battle, but the scars of war would remain. He had destroyed the monster, but the monster had been his best friend. The victory was bittersweet, the emotional cost immeasurable. He pulled out his phone to call the penthouse, to check on the children. And as he dialed, he realized that the resolution of one conflict was only the beginning of another journey, the journey to rebuild a world from the ashes of truth. The weeks that followed Ricardo's downfall were not ones of celebration, but of silent, meticulous rebuilding. Arthur's first victory, saving the children, came with the devastating cost of confronting the extent of the betrayal. Years of his life, his most precious memories with Helena, were now tainted. He found himself re-examining every photo, every recollection, searching for the signs he had missed. It was a painful process, a double grief. For the wife he had lost, and for the friendship he had discovered he never truly had. As Arthur's team dismantled Ricardo's financial empire, recovering millions in diverted assets and funds, Arthur focused on a different kind of estate. He finalized the legal guardianship of Leah and Theo, a process his influence and resources made surprisingly swift. The two children, who had entered his life as catalysts for a crisis, now became the center of his new universe. The penthouse, once a cold and empty space, began to fill with life. Laughter echoed through corridors where only silence had once reigned. Colorful toys contrasted with the minimalist decor. Sophia, the housekeeper, found new joy in preparing snacks and telling bedtime stories. The second victory, achieving justice for Helena, took an unexpected form. With Anna's testimony and the evidence gathered by Miller, authorities reopened investigations not only into her accident, but also into the deaths of other individuals connected to Ricardo. A dark subplot emerged. Other businessmen, whose wives frequented the same upscale grocery store, had died of natural causes in recent years. Ricardo was systematically eliminating the husbands of women he coveted, not out of affection, but as pawns in his power game. The full exposure of his scheme saved countless potential victims, transforming Arthur's personal tragedy into a matter of public safety. Ricardo Amaral, the business genius, became the infamous grocery store poisoner, his downfall as spectacular as his rise. However, Arthur's greatest challenge wasn't legal or financial, but emotional. How to build a family from shards of trauma. Theo, though physically recovered thanks to the best medical care, suffered from nightmares. Leah, the little warrior, carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, feeling responsible for everyone's safety. Arthur realized that his obsession with control and his tendency to solve problems with money wouldn't be enough. He needed to learn how to be a father. He started small. He'd take them to the park. He'd sit on the floor to assemble puzzles with Theo. He'd read stories to Leah until she fell asleep, not in her own room, but in an armchair beside her brother's bed, her hand protectively outstretched. He listened. He heard about Theo's fears of the dark and about Leah's worry that he would send her away when he no longer needed her secrets. "Leah," he said one night, sitting between their two beds, "the secret you told me was the key that opened a door. But it was you and Theo who walked through that door and stayed. This is your home. I'm not your savior. We are a family, and families don't fall apart." The deepest transformation happened within Arthur himself. The memory of Helena, once a sacred and painful sanctuary, began to shift. He realized that protecting her didn't mean freezing her in time as a perfect victim. It meant honoring the strong, vibrant woman she was, recognizing that she, too, had been deceived. He stopped blaming himself for not having seen the truth, understanding that trust isn't a weakness, but a gift Ricardo had profaned. His final victory wasn't Ricardo's imprisonment, but what he chose to do with the aftermath. He used a significant portion of the recovered fortune to establish the Helena Sterling Foundation, but it wasn't a common charity foundation. Its purpose was twofold: to completely reform the local child protection system, exposing negligence in shelters like the one Leah and Theo had lived in, and to create a unique program to train social workers and police officers to recognize and validate the testimonies of children who witnessed traumatic events. The premise was simple. Children see what adults overlook. The girl who offered a secret in exchange for milk inspired an institution that would transform traumatized survivors into advocates for justice. Leah, though still a child, became the silent symbol of this movement. She didn't need to speak publicly or give interviews. Her story, told anonymously, was enough to inspire radical change. 4 weeks after that fateful encounter in the wine aisle, Arthur stood on his penthouse balcony, watching Leah teach Theo to kick a ball. The sound of their laughter was the highest return any of his investments had ever yielded. He, the millionaire who believed he could buy anything, had discovered that the most valuable things, truth, trust, family, were priceless. They came with a devastating emotional cost, one he had paid in full. But looking at those two children, he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the return was worth every penny of pain. Justice had been served, conflicts resolved, and from the ashes of a life built on lies, a new and authentic family was, finally, beginning to blossom. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over the city, and for the first time in over a year, Arthur Sterling didn't see the glow as a painful reminder of what he had lost, but as a promise of what was to come. He was in the same upscale grocery store, but the environment no longer haunted him. The wine aisle wasn't a memorial, but just an aisle. The aroma of fresh bread wasn't a trigger for nostalgia, but simply the smell of bread. The place that had been the stage for the beginning of his nightmare had transformed into a symbol of his redemption. He wasn't alone. Beside him, Leah pushed a small shopping cart, a miniature version of his own, with a seriousness that would make any fund manager envious. In the cart, Theo, clutching a plush dinosaur, pointed at the shelves with enthusiasm. "Cookie!" he exclaimed. "We're here to get milk, Theo," Leah said with the patience of an older sister. Though she herself was only 6, milk and ingredients for Sophia's cake. Arthur smiled. That scene, so domestically normal, was his greatest treasure. It was proof that life, even after the deepest devastation, could rearrange itself into a new pattern of happiness. His fortune, his stocks, his businesses, all of it now served a greater purpose: to build a safe harbor for those two souls who had navigated such a terrible storm. As they passed the checkout, the same cashier who had served them weeks earlier was there. She looked at Arthur, then at the children, and a genuine smile lit her face. "What a beautiful family, sir," she commented. The word family resonated in Arthur with a deep and satisfying truth. He didn't correct her. He simply thanked her, because that's what they were: an improbable family forged in tragedy, but strengthened by truth and resilient love. Later, at home, while Sophia baked the cake, Arthur sat with the children in the living room. The evening news played on television, and a report about the Helena Sterling Foundation appeared. It showed images of the new training center for social workers and an interview with the director of the shelter where Leah and Theo had lived, now completely reformed and under new management. The journalist spoke about an anonymous donor whose vision was revolutionizing child protection in the city. Leah looked at the screen, then at Arthur. "Are they talking about Helena's mom?" she asked. Arthur hesitated, then nodded. "In a way, yes. They're talking about the good her name is doing, about how her story is helping to protect other people, especially other children." He realized in that moment the conclusion of his own arc of overcoming. He was no longer desperately trying to protect a perfect and fragile memory. He was transforming the pain of that memory into an active legacy of protection and justice. The truth about Helena's death didn't destroy her. It gave her a new purpose. Their story had quietly spread through the right circles. The children's courage, though protected by anonymity, had become a silent legend. The upscale grocery store, once a symbol of indifferent privilege, had implemented a new training program in partnership with the foundation, teaching its employees to observe suspicious behavior patterns, to be alert to the vulnerable, to be the eyes and ears of the community. The place where a dark secret almost destroyed lives became an example of community vigilance and care. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Arthur went to the balcony. The city glittered below him, a tapestry of interconnected lights and lives. He thought about the journey of the past 4 weeks. The man who believed money could fix everything had discovered that true wealth lay in human connection. The girl who offered a secret in exchange for milk was not just the guardian of a terrible truth. She was the personification of resilience, proof that even the smallest and seemingly powerless can carry the light that exposes the deepest darkness. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Miller, the detective. A single sentence. "Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration." Arthur looked inside, at the 2 small forms sleeping peacefully in their rooms. Restoration. It was the perfect word. He couldn't bring Helena back. He couldn't erase Ricardo's betrayal, but he could restore hope. He could restore safety. He could restore 2 children's belief that the world, despite its capacity for darkness, also contained immense and unwavering goodness. He was no longer haunted by the past, nor anxious about the future. He was fully present, anchored in that hard-won moment of peace. The pain of loss was still there, a soft scar on his heart. But it was no longer an open wound. It was a reminder that love is vulnerable, that trust is a risk, but that it's worth taking. Because in the end, it's not the walls we build to protect ourselves that define us, but the bridges we dare to build to reach out to others.